A ship was given official clearance to enter the Strait of Hormuz. It followed the rules. It filed the paperwork. And then Iran's Revolutionary Guard gunboats opened fire on it anyway. That happened yesterday. And right now, as you are watching this video, one of the most critical shipping lanes on the entire planet Earth, a narrow strip of water just 21 miles wide at its tightest point, is once again closed. Warships are patrolling it. Mines are floating in it. And the world's oil supply is hanging on whatever happens in the next 72 hours. This is not a story about a faraway conflict that doesn't affect you. This is a story about the gas in your car, the food on your table, the price of your airline ticket, and whether the fragile ceasefire holding this whole situation together survives until Wednesday, or shatters before then. So stay with me because I'm going to take you through the full picture. How we got here, what happened yesterday, what is happening right now, and what comes next. Because this story is moving fast, and you need to understand all of it. Let's go back to February 28, 2026. That is the day this entire crisis began. In the early hours of that morning, the United States and Israel launched a massive coordinated military operation called Operation Epic Fury. Nearly 900 airstrikes in 12 hours, targeting Iranian military facilities, nuclear sites, missile infrastructure, air defenses, and leadership. The very first night of strikes killed Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, one of the most significant leadership eliminations in modern military history. Dozens of other senior Iranian officials were also killed in those opening hours. And in the chaos of that first night, a missile struck a girls' school adjacent to a naval base in Manab, near Bandar Abbas, killing approximately 170 civilians, a strike that immediately set off a global firestorm of controversy and condemnation. Now, the tensions that led to this moment didn't appear overnight. Decades of hostility between the United States and Iran, stretching all the way back to the Islamic Revolution in 1979 and the Iran hostage crisis, had been building for a generation. The more immediate triggers were Iran's nuclear program, its long-range ballistic missiles, its military reach across the Middle East through proxy groups, and years of failed attempts to renegotiate a nuclear agreement after the 2015 deal, known as the JCPOA, collapsed. By February 2026, those tensions had reached a breaking point. Talks in Geneva had failed. Iran had been steadily advancing its nuclear capabilities, and on February 28th, the decision was made to act. Iran's response was immediate and overwhelming. Hundreds of retaliatory missiles and thousands of drones were launched across the region, targeting U.S. embassies, military installations, and oil infrastructure throughout the Middle East. Within hours, the entire region was on fire. Bahrain, Iraq, Israel, Kuwait, Qatar, Syria, and the UAE all closed their airspace. Emirates, Etihad, Qatar Airways, the major Middle Eastern carriers, suspended all operations. International airlines from British Airways to Lufthansa to Air India began rerouting flights thousands of miles around the conflict zone. 15,000 cruise ship passengers were stranded on at least 6 vessels in the Persian Gulf, with nowhere safe to go. And the Houthis in Yemen announced they were resuming attacks on commercial ships in the Red Sea, meaning 2 of the world's most critical shipping choke points were now simultaneously under threat at the same time. But none of that compared to what happened at the Strait of Hormuz. Here is what you need to understand about this waterway. 20%, 1/5, of all the oil traded on Earth passes through this strait every single day. That is roughly 20 million barrels. Not just oil for the Middle East, oil for Europe, oil for Asia, oil for the United States. Qatar's liquefied natural gas, which supplies enormous portions of Europe's energy, flows through it. 25% of the world's entire LNG supply transits that strait. When it closes, the entire global energy system does not just slow down, it begins to choke. And it closed. The International Energy Agency later described what happened as the largest oil supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. Not the biggest in recent years, the biggest ever. The head of the IEA called it the greatest global energy security challenge in history. Within days of the conflict beginning, oil prices surged from below $70 a barrel on February 27th to a peak of nearly $120. Gas prices in the United States hit $4 a gallon by March 31st. Iraq and Kuwait began curtailing oil production because with storage facilities full and the strait closed, there was literally nowhere for the oil to go. Airlines started canceling routes and hiking ticket prices. Fertilizer prices began climbing because the same strait carries the LNG used to produce fertilizers, and spring planting season was approaching fast. Economists started using words like stagflation and recession. Japan, which gets 94% of its crude oil from the Middle East, began releasing 80 million barrels from its strategic reserves, about 15 days of domestic demand, just to keep the lights on. South Korea launched a national energy-saving campaign encouraging citizens to take shorter showers and use washing machines less. Shell's CEO warned that Europe could face fuel shortages by April. British supermarket chain Asda reported that its fuel stations were already running short, and cargo ships operated by Maersk, CMA CGM, and Hapag-Lloyd, some of the biggest shipping companies on Earth, suspended transits entirely, forcing goods to be rerouted around the entire African continent via the Cape of Good Hope, adding weeks to delivery times and billions to shipping costs. The world had not seen an energy shock like this since the 1973 oil crisis. Some economists said it was worse. For 8 weeks, the diplomacy churned and the military pressure escalated. In late March, President Trump threatened to obliterate Iranian power plants if the strait was not fully reopened within 48 hours. Iran's new supreme leader, Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the man who was killed in the opening strikes, and reportedly an even harder liner than his father, responded defiantly, saying the Navy stands ready to inflict bitter defeats on its enemies. Iran also began charging ships over $1 million per vessel just to transit the strait, essentially turning the most important waterway in the world into a toll booth. On April 8, the temporary ceasefire was reached. It was supposed to last 10 days. Iran announced the strait would reopen. The world breathed a small, cautious sigh of relief. Oil prices fell. Ships began moving. For one brief moment, it genuinely felt like the worst of the crisis might be winding down. But even during that so-called reopening, the situation was never truly clean. Iran did not simply open the strait the way it had been before the war. Instead, Iranian authorities issued maps and guidance requiring ships to follow a very specific northern route through the strait, a narrow lane that skirts close to Iran's Larak Island, which analysts described as essentially functioning as a toll booth. Ships had to coordinate directly with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Navy. And the fee? Over $1 million per vessel just to transit. $1 million per ship, for the privilege of sailing through a waterway that international law says should be open to all. That is the environment that had taken hold even before Saturday's escalation. Because here is what happened next. Iran reopened the strait, but only for ships that followed Iranian-designated routes and paid Iranian fees. And President Trump made something very clear. The U.S. Navy blockade of Iranian ports was staying in place. Every ship going to or from Iran would still be intercepted. The blockade, Trump said on Truth Social, and his exact words are important here, will remain in full force and effect as it pertains to Iran only, until such time as our transaction with Iran is 100% complete. Iran's Supreme National Security Council fired back immediately, calling the ongoing U.S. blockade a violation of the ceasefire. The council said Iran would prevent any conditional and limited reopening of the strait. Translation: if the U.S. doesn't lift the blockade, the strait goes back to its previous state. No ships, no oil, no exceptions. Talks were attempted. Pakistani mediators flew between Washington and Tehran trying to bridge the gap. Vice President JD Vance led a round of direct negotiations in Islamabad that produced, according to reporting at the time, no concrete movement toward a peace deal. The differences were not just about the blockade. Iran was demanding a comprehensive end to the war, security assurances, sanctions relief, the unfreezing of billions in frozen assets, a resolution of the nuclear question, and relief from the broader military pressure. The United States was not ready to give all of that, and so the gap remained. Then, on Friday, April 17th, Iran's foreign minister announced that the Strait of Hormuz was completely open to all commercial vessels for the duration of the ceasefire. Oil prices dropped on the news. Ships began making their way toward the strait. For about 16 hours, it looked like the situation had stabilized again. And then, Saturday happened. On April 18th, yesterday, the United States confirmed it was keeping its naval blockade of Iranian ports fully in place. Trump posted that the blockade would remain in full force until a deal was done. Iran's military responded within hours. The Joint Military Command issued a statement saying control of the Strait of Hormuz has returned to its previous state, under strict management and control of the armed forces. The Revolutionary Guard Navy went further, warning that no vessel should make any movement from its anchorage in the Persian Gulf in the Sea of Oman, and that approaching the Strait of Hormuz will be considered as cooperation with the enemy and be targeted. They were not bluffing. Revolutionary Guard gunboats opened fire on a tanker that was attempting to transit the strait. An unknown projectile struck a container vessel, damaging some of its cargo containers. According to a U.S. defense official who spoke to Axios, at least 3 separate attacks on commercial ships occurred on Saturday alone. The United Kingdom's Maritime Trade Operations Center confirmed 2 of the attacks. At least 1 ship was struck and sustained damage. Audio recordings from the incident captured the moment a dispatcher told a vessel that had been given clearance, that it needed to turn around immediately. And incredibly, one of those ships was carrying 2 million barrels of Iraqi oil. That oil is now not going anywhere. India's reaction tells you everything about how serious this is. India's foreign ministry summoned Iran's ambassador over what it called a serious incident involving 2 Indian-flagged merchant vessels that were fired upon in the strait. India, a country that gets enormous amounts of its energy through that waterway, explicitly called on Iran to resume facilitating India-bound ships across the strait as quickly as possible. India being directly drawn into this standoff is a significant escalation. U.S. Central Command confirmed that since the blockade began, 23 ships have complied with U.S. instructions to turn around and return to Iran. 23 ships carrying oil, gas, and goods simply stopped in their tracks. The ceasefire that was supposed to hold until Wednesday, April 22nd, just 3 days from now, is now under enormous strain. So where does that leave us right now, today, April 19th, 2026? The strait is closed. Ships are turning back. Iran's military says it stays that way until the U.S. blockade is lifted. The U.S. says the blockade stays until a full deal is reached. Pakistan is still working to arrange a second round of negotiations early next week, and Iran says it has received new proposals from the United States that are being reviewed, but what those proposals actually contain has not been made public. The ceasefire that was supposed to hold until Wednesday, April 22nd, just 3 days from now, is under enormous and growing strain. And here is the truly terrifying part. Nobody actually knows what happens if it expires without a deal. What we are watching in real time is a standoff between 2 positions that are completely incompatible with each other right now. The U.S. says the blockade stays until there is a deal. Iran says there is no reopening of the strait until the blockade ends. Both sides are using economic and military pressure as leverage. Both sides believe time is on their side. And every day that this drags on, ordinary people in the United States, in India, in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, pay more at the gas pump, pay more for groceries, and wait longer for goods that are stuck on ships that cannot get through 21 miles of contested water. The next 72 hours are going to matter enormously. Either Pakistan's mediators help bridge the gap and a second round of talks gets underway before Wednesday, or the ceasefire expires and this situation escalates into territory that nobody, not economists, not military analysts, not world leaders, actually wants to enter. History is being made right now in that narrow strip of water between Iran and Oman, and you deserve to understand every piece of it, not tomorrow, not next week, but right now, while it still matters. We will be covering every single development as it happens on this channel, including the ceasefire deadline on Wednesday and whatever comes out of the next round of negotiations in Pakistan. If you want to stay ahead of this story and every major U.S. and global news story that follows, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications. We cover the full picture, not just the headline. We give you the context, the history, the numbers, and the human cost, so that when you talk about this story with your friends, your family, or your coworkers, you actually know what you are talking about. Drop a comment below right now. Do you think a deal gets done before Wednesday's ceasefire deadline? Do you think the U.S. blockade should stay or should it be lifted as part of a broader agreement? This is one of the most consequential geopolitical standoffs of the last decade, and your perspective genuinely matters to this community. Like this video if it gave you a clearer and deeper picture of what is actually happening in the Strait of Hormuz, and share it with someone who deserves to understand this story properly, because the mainstream news cycle moves far too fast and far too shallow to give it the depth it demands. We will see you in the next one.